welcome to the next in the 67 steps. Almost done here. Remember though, there's lots of other stuff coming. You can stay in the program. People get a little confused. It's not just 67 steps. I mean, it is just 67 steps, but that's not all. So you can stay on in the VIP program as many months as you want to stay. I'm continually getting the most cutting edge stuff. Just had an interview with George Mumford. He called me Michael Jordan's psychologist, all the things he learned, meditation and awareness, and not in a weird way, but literally working with the most cutting edge athletes and performers like Michael Jordan and taking them to another level and just sharing stuff with me that I don't share on my YouTube or Instagram and Twitter. It's only for you here in this program. So that's happening every day. You know, Henry Winkler, Fonzie, just took him out in Ferrari, all this cool stuff that these guys are putting in my brain that I'm just lucky enough to be able to pass on to you, and we're recording them directly. Dave Asprey, I just did, David Buss, Joel Salatin, Brandon Carter, all this stuff is there for you. So remember that as you keep going through the program. So when the 67 steps stops, just keep going. The premium, all the other programs here, because if you look on the side there, where you see the 67 steps, if you scroll down, you'll see all the bonuses, and then you'll see the stuff I'm continuing to release week by week. So tell people, focus on return on investment. This stuff has a high return on investment. So once you finish the 67 steps, remember, that's 67 steps to change a habit or begin to change a habit. Some people need longer. I'm a little bit slower of a learner, you know. So and then once you learn one thing, there's another thing to learn. So 67 steps is just boom, boom, you just keep going. But anyway, talk about that more at the end. But today, this one we're talking about Elvis Presley and the Persistent Widow. What Jerry Weintraub knew. So one of my favorite books, if you've looked in the recommended book list, is this Jerry Weintraub, where he talks about his life, his autobiography. If you don't know who he is, one of the most successful people in Hollywood. Managed Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra, and managed I think the Doors and John Denver, and did the movie Karate Kid and Ocean's 11 and 12 and 13, and all this stuff, made hundreds of millions of dollars, but more importantly lived an amazingly interesting life and did a lot of things right. He's still alive here in Hollywood. I just saw him on like the Tonight Show or something. Fascinating guy. And in life, and really in the 67 steps program too, you know, the hinging element, what everything hinges on, is this concept that's really an old story. It's the persistent widow. And there's a story where Jesus Christ was telling, and he said there was a woman who every day would go to a judge's house, and she'd say, I want justice for my dead husband. He was treated unfairly, and I want you to help. And the widow said, and the judge said, I'm a busy man. I don't want to talk to you. And she showed up the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And finally in the story, the judge looks at her and says, listen, I don't care about you, and I don't care about your husband. But because you are asking me so persistently, I'm going to give you justice. Now, that's a 2,000-year-old plus parable story, but it's still applicable today. Jerry Weintraub, my favorite story in that book, When I Stop Talking, You Know I'm Dead. That's his autobiography. He says he's meeting with, he's 26 years old, and he wakes up from a dream, and he tells his wife that he's going to finally do his lifelong dream, his real dream, which had been to move to Hollywood. I think it was in New York or something like that. And she laughed at him and said, you're $60,000 or $70,000 in debt. Remember, this is back in, I think, the 40s or 50s. That was a lot of money. It's a lot of money now. It was a heck of a lot of money back then. She goes, you're 26. Nobody knows you. How are you going to do this? And she really, she wasn't an optimist, which the greatest thing to be surrounded by, but he was like that persistent widow. He said, well, I'm going to do what is within my power now. And he had read that Elvis Presley was managed by the Colonel. So if you don't know about the Colonel, was basically this business manager who, controversial figure, but definitely had, control of Elvis's agenda and what Elvis was going to perform at. And so Jerry Weintraub says to his wife, I'm going to take Elvis out on tour. And he goes out and he gets on the phone, and he remembered in that article about the Colonel that the Colonel woke up early. So he woke up, Jerry Weintraub woke up early, like 5 in the morning or 6 in the morning, and he calls to the Colonel and says, hey, I'd like to take Elvis out on tour. And of course the Colonel goes, who are you? And he goes, my name's Jerry Weintraub. You never heard of me, but this is my goal. And Elvis's manager, the Colonel, just goes, boom, hang up. But of course, Jerry remembered. Persistence. Next day, he called the Colonel at 5 or 6 in the morning again. Colonel, it was so early, he was still at home, the Colonel was. So the Colonel picks up the phone. He says, this is Jerry Weintraub. I want to take Elvis Presley on the road. And again, the Colonel hangs up the phone. And over, and it said Jerry Weintraub did that for almost 1 year. Kind of reminded me of Bill Gates. Bill Gates started at 12 years old, kind of messing with computers. And then I read somewhere where Bill Gates said from age 21 to age 30, he never took a day off, not even one. 10 years, 3,650 straight days of going in and working on his software. And that made Bill Gates accomplish so much more than almost any person that you or I have ever encountered. And that simple formula, it's almost too simple. It's like people are looking and they're just overlooking the fundamentals. Like Phil Jackson, the Chicago Bull and Los Angeles Laker basketball coach, and really the most winning coach of our time. It's 13 rings, 11 as a player. Can't even fit them on one hand. Every single game, every single practice, he would have Michael Jordan doing simple fundamentals. This is the fundamentals. 67 Steps is about new things that you haven't heard, like Larry Destiny and all this kind of stuff. But it's also about fundamentals. You got to have some of the fundamentals and some of the advanced stuff. And so Jerry Weintraub understood the fundamentals. And he's calling and he said, after about 1 year of doing this, the Colonel picked up the phone and he said, do you still want to take my boy Elvis out on the road? And Jerry Weintraub was shocked, of course, and said, sure. And the Colonel said, meet me in Vegas tomorrow morning with a check for $1 million. Now, once again, Jerry Weintraub had no money. Coming up with $1 million in the 40s or 50s, he says there wasn't as many millionaires as there are now. The world's a lot wealthier of a place. But Jerry Weintraub, he already had the fundamental formula for getting what he wanted, getting the good life, which was persistence. So he just applied that. He now had the Colonel's quote-unquote blessing. Now he applied that to just calling everybody he knew and friends of friends. Hey, do you have $1 million I could borrow? And he started calling at 8 in the morning or 8 at night, and just kept calling all night. And because the Colonel had said, if you don't come with $1 million tomorrow, the deal's off. And he said, meet me in Vegas. And I think at that time, Jerry Weintraub had made his way and was in Los Angeles. So Jerry Weintraub had to buy a plane ticket and all this and get on the phone. And he finally found friend of a friend of a friend or something like that. That was a radio station owner. And he said, I love Elvis. Do anything to get Elvis back out on tour. I'll lend you the money. And he gave it, Jerry Weintraub. He wired it down. And Jerry Weintraub flew to Vegas, walked into that bank. It was funny because the book says that when he asked the bank teller for $1 million check, certified check or whatever, she was like, hold on, I gotta get my manager. Because the check was supposed to be made out to Elvis Presley. So she probably thought he was insane. But he went back to the manager of the bank. Jerry talked to the manager and ended up the manager saying, hey, can I come work for you? See, the bank manager realized the bank manager was stuck in a dead-end job, and Jerry Weintraub was going places. And he was smart. He was an investor. Of course, Jerry didn't have him come work for him, but he took that $1 million check, walked across the street to the casino. I forget which casino. A lot of those casinos are gone out of Vegas now, but walks in. The Colonel's sitting there playing roulette. And so Jerry let him finish his game of roulette. They walked upstairs. Sure enough, he said, I walked in the room. There's Elvis Presley, most famous man in the world at that time, really. And Jerry Weintraub hands a check to the Colonel and Elvis made out for $1 million. And it said the Colonel walked to the back, opened a safe, and put the money, that check in there. Handshake deal. Didn't even have a contract. I don't recommend you do that, but turned out the Colonel and Elvis didn't do them wrong. They stuck with their end of the deal. And it's actually, the story is even more interesting because they go out on tour. Jerry Weintraub, of course, had used persistent, like the persistent widow, persistence, first to get the Colonel to agree to let him tour with Elvis, then to get to Vegas, then to get the bank teller, and of course to get the radio station owner to give him $1 million. All persistence, 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 persistence. And he goes then, and they go out on tour, and Elvis said, I have one rule. If I go out on stage and there's empty seats, it's not packed, I'm going to go back behind the curtain and the deal's done. I won't perform for you. So Jerry Weintraub was nervous. Their first gig was down in Miami, and the Jerry Weintraub's goes, whatever, they sold 10,000 tickets or whatever it was into I think it was an outdoor arena or something with an amphitheater. And Jerry Weintraub says he went and checked, and he made sure there was like 10,000 tickets sold and 10,000 seats, so that when Elvis walked out on stage, it would be perfect. There wouldn't be any empty seats. And when Jerry showed up the next day, I think the day of the concert in the morning, the stadium owner had added more seats, like thousands of more seats, so that they could sell overflow. And Jerry Weintraub's like, you just destroyed everything I've worked for, because now when Elvis comes out on stage, there's going to be thousands of extra seats empty just because you're trying to make another buck. So, but Jerry Weintraub, once again, creative, persistent. He applied that to that situation once again to get over the hurdle. And what did he do? He actually went to a minimum security prison, of all things, went to the warden, said, hey, I got a problem. I need manpower to unbolt all these, they have a little ratchet. You got to unbolt the chairs that are unused before Elvis comes on stage. And these were different times. You couldn't do this nowadays. The warden's like, sure. And gave them all these inmates, and they went and unbolted the chairs, and Elvis came out on stage, first concert, and all the seats were there, packed. And Jerry went on, took them on tour, and Jerry became one of the richest men in Hollywood, really in the world, from what? That fundamental that everybody wants to avoid. I put on my Twitter or something the other day, I was like, doesn't everybody read? Aren't people reading that persistence, sticking to it for a while is the name of this game? Because what happens with the media is bombarding you with what's called media bias, cognitive bias. It's related to the availability bias, which says, okay, they only do stories on lifestyles of the rich and famous once they're rich and famous. It's not a good story. There's no ratings to show Bill Gates sitting in a cubicle for 10 years. There's never that story. So you and I, that's why I'm so big on you reading autobiographies and biographies. Because by reading those, guess what? You're getting the full story. And in the full story of, I just finished Johnny Carson's book. I'm reading Pat O'Brien, the reporter's book. I'm reading, is it Ava Gardner's book I just started? No, it's the other one. I'll remember in a second. The famous, beautiful woman in the 50s. And when you read this story, inevitably, every single time, it becomes a story of persistence. But school system, how many classes did you have on persistence? I had none. If you're lucky to have parents that taught you that, that's great. Not everybody did. But if you could have one attribute, I'm not sure, if you could have a handful of attributes, 5 to be successful. For sure, persistence is in that 5, without a doubt. And you hear that, I was reading something by 50 Cent, the rapper, and he said something about a diagnosis of why people aren't persistent. So in his experience, he said most people get bored too easily, so they don't stick to one thing. And he's like, you must flip a switch in your brain. Whenever you start to feel bored by sticking to one thing, get rid of that. It's a nightmare, he said. I mean, I'm paraphrasing 50 Cent's words, but I thought that was interesting. At every level, whether it's Hollywood music and Elvis and Weintraub, whether it's in the Bible thousands of years ago, whether it's a rapper nowadays, whether it's Bill Gates. Everywhere you turn, it's an irrefutable story. Now, there's definitely shortcuts. So one thing I'll say is some people, and this is a very important point, they confuse persistence with effective persistence. All persistence is not effective. So, for example, if I decided I'm going to be, the next American Idol contestant, I don't have a good voice. It's not my cup of tea. It's not my fate. It's not my destiny in life. The cards didn't play out that way. So, for me to persistently pursue a vocal career would be ineffective persistence. So, a couple takeaways that I have for you. In order to really make persistence not just be stubbornness, because stubbornness to me is what I call ineffective persistence. So, on one extreme, you have people who get bored easily, like 50 Cent said, or just can't stick to anything. They're over here. And then you got people way over here who are stubborn. I want you, like Aristotle said, avoid the extremes. Thesis, antithesis, or antithesis, and synthesis. You need the happy median, that blend. And what that blend is persistence. It's not being a pushover. It's not getting easily bored. It's not being ADD. If you saw that book post I did, by the way, on ADHD, where a doctor, a famous one, says it doesn't exist. Pretty controversial book. Check it out if you haven't seen it on my YouTube or it's in the book summaries here. So you got that. If you're just always, new shiny objects, you never stick to one thing. You're at one extreme. But don't pat yourself on the back if you're over here and you're just a stubborn person who always just sticks to something that has no potential chance. Then both of those are complete wastes of life. You get there in that middle ground and what the middle ground is like that saying that I think it was the country music singer who said, "The Gambler" by Kenny Rogers. He said, you got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them. So if you're on this side and you're always moving from one thing to another, never sticking to it, not persistent at all, you probably got to learn to hold it a little longer. And if you're a person that just decides a commitment, consistency, cognitive bias, where they go, well, I decided that I'm going to, build a business with this product and I'm never going to change. Imagine if Kevin Systrom from Instagram, his original idea was to make an app for a phone that was like a contact address book. And he started that. But he was smart enough to know when to fold them, to not be stubborn. And he said, I think there's something better. And so we call that a pivot. I like to call it building on top. He built on top of that and then pivoted into something called Instagram. And he sold it, I think, within 3 to 5 years for around $1 billion to Facebook. $1 billion. That is the reward. Jerry Weintraub, that's the reward of persistency, the persistent widow. So the takeaway number 1, find the balance. Takeaway number 2, build the tested judgment. Some people call it wisdom. Benjamin Graham, who is the mentor of Warren Buffett, and Benjamin Graham is also pretty much the founder of modern stock market investment or value investment theory. He wrote a series of books. One of them is called Intelligent Investor. I don't know, you might be in the business program. If you're not in the business program, make sure if you're in business or getting ready to be an entrepreneur, you can apply for that. There's a separate link. It's separate from this program. But those of you in that program, if you happen to be in there, I went over in the twice a month live call, the book Intelligent Investor. And one of the things Benjamin Graham says in terms of how to take action, he says it's a threefold step. Adequate knowledge, okay? You got to know. That's what I was saying. Adequate knowledge and adequate potential. Like, I have no potential to be a rock star, I'm pretty sure. I wasn't born with that. So you got to have that adequate base. And then on top of that, you have to have tested judgment, which means you have to test and try things. Move around a little bit, not too much, so that you start to get a sixth sense of, yeah, that's good. Oh, that's not good. And when you do that and develop that sixth sense, that's when he says you make courageous action. That's when you can be persistent. So build the persistence around knowledge and tested judgment. So then you can clearly know when to hold them and when to fold them. Okay, so question for you. What is an example of something you were not persistent enough in hindsight? You moved too quickly. It could be a business. It could be someone you dated. It could be a friendship. It could be, a hobby like learning to play piano or something. What's an example? So that's the first question. Second question is, what's an example of something you stuck to too long? You didn't fold it. You were overly persistent, aka stubborn in a relationship, a business partner, a company. Oh man, I tend to be a little more. I'm not real flaky, so I don't tend to be mistakes on that extreme. But this one, I can just be like, oh man. I always say a mistake is just an experiment run too long. You run an experiment for a short period of time, it's not a mistake. But I have a tendency and a fault of running experiments much longer than they need to be run, which is just wasting time. So what's an example where you have? Okay. And then lastly, okay, what is something right now, a very clear step, and you've been sticking with the 67 steps, so that's one answer. Clearly sticking with the 67 steps. But what's another example of something you're going to commit to now for the next 67 days of being persistent to? Stick in the VIP program for another 67 days. That's an example. Costs a little bit of money, but it's pennies on the dollar in terms of value. Or find something else, reading a book a day, or going to a conference, or doing sit-ups every morning. It's better. I think it was Bruce Lee that said something like, I don't fear the man who's done 10,000 kicks. I fear the man who's done one kick for 10,000 days. Persistence. All right? What's something you're going to commit right now to be more persistent to? Okay? Answer those, and I will see you on the next, and I think last 67 step, or one of the last. All right?